Hey, I was going to say Cub fans because of my Bricks Behind the Ivy days, but hey, baseball fans. This is Jeff Candid Cubs Ragauskis, and we are starting a brand new podcast adventure here with one of the most amazing human beings in Europe, Mr. Jake McKibbin. And welcome to a Brewers Cubs rivalry podcast, 94 Problems. Jake, how are you doing today?
Hey, Jeff. Yeah, not doing too bad. We've reached the weekend. There might be a few Guinness in my future, and life is looking up. How are you doing, big man?
I'm surviving. It's been a while since I've put myself into the podcast game, and yeah, we were talking on Blue Sky, the preferred social media network now, compared to the owner of the other social media network, and talked about like this concept, like the Cubs and the Brewers have become probably one of the better rivalries in the Central at minimum, and maybe one of the better rivalries in baseball. Is Brewers, I would say, had started as like kid brother, and now like they have had the Cubs number at least since 2017 in how they deploy their team and how they seem to effectively attack the Cubs' weaknesses. And we can talk, and I'll ask you this a little bit later on about the L flag after the division series, but yeah, it's definitely something I think that's worth talking about. As like you are as like on top of the Brewers, even overseas, as I am on the Cubs, and these are two teams that are regularly competing for this division. And getting a fresh perspective of like how I feel about the Brewers and how you feel about the Cubs is something I feel like can add to this baseball podcasting space.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I should at least say, I sort of became a baseball fan around 2019. My cousin took me to a Brewers game. I've been over for 3 days, slept about 12 hours, but I was just high on life, man. I was loving life. Went to a Brewers game, sleep had caught up with me, sick as a dog, and but still somehow sort of kept following day by day. So 2019. So I've only ever known good Milwaukee Brewers seasons. Like that is my life. I've seen them miss the playoffs once in that period. So I'm incredibly lucky given I look at what came before that. But certainly you get a flavor, even since writing of this sort of the rivalry this goes on between Cubs fans. I run into some in Ireland. Your hats are quite popular in general. There's generally a bit of slobber back and forth, but it's all pretty good natured. And actually, I think despite the sort of stories you hear, you always hear sort of the worst of things about, such and such started a fight over here. It's quite a good nature rivalry where everybody's slobbering at each other, but no one's really going too far, which I think is just so much fun. Like, I am so here for it, Jeff.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, I've been a baseball fan quite a bit longer than you have, and I'm like what the classic like cradle Cub fan, born into a family of Cub fans. This like basement is my shrine to my love of baseball, and then Star Wars and Superman and all the other things that I love because I fan super hard. But yeah, I come from a perspective of like the more recent years have been the most successful the Cubs have ever been ever. And most of my life, I had to find the minutia, the small details in the game, and pick a team going into the playoffs. And because it was never the Cubs, like, and you can, prior to, 2015, you can count the number of times the Cubs made the playoffs in my lifetime on one hand. And that's, so like it's very interesting. Like you have come into the success where like I think of like the Ricky Weeks and Jeremy Burnitz and like Ryan Braun in his heyday, and like have seen the Brewers in a much longer lens. That this rivalry feels kind of like a surprise, and in a weird way, it also feels like it's nice for the city of Milwaukee. I'll say that from the outsider's perspective. Like the Cubs fans have always gone to Wrigley North, as we have not as accepted by Brewers.
Calm down with that, Jeff.
Yeah. No, but like
at least Lurby in this.
I'm not going to refer to it as Wrigley North. Like I understand, like, but really, and my wife and I were just talking about this. Like, it has a lot to do with affordability. Like, you can go to a Brewers game, like, and go a whole weekend's a Brewers game, and it's like reasonably priced. There's tailgating, there's a fun factor there. Like you can't do that at Wrigley. You can't go to a whole weekend at Wrigley without like getting a second mortgage. So like the Wrigley North thing, I think is more of a moniker that is kind of I think it's more of a negative about the Cubs have become this unaffordable experience. Like that, like it's just easier to drive up 94 and go see the Cubs play in a place that's actually affordable, family friendly. And that's like, so that's, I think the Wrigley North thing, as much as it was a fun moniker to begin with, I don't think it's necessarily about invading the ballpark as more of it's an indictment on how much it costs to go to Wrigley Field.
I mean, even having been there, like I said, I've been to Ampan Field just once, but like one of the things I really took away was how amazing, like we don't tailgate over here. That's just not a thing. The idea of parking up, you just have random people with barbecues just sitting there like frying stuff in the middle of a Saturday, and like they pulled that barbecue down, and then you have other people saying, "Hey, can you fry my meat?" Someone brought raw meat for someone else to put in a barbecue for them. This is the most, everybody's got a beer open and just chilling and chatting, and I just think that is one of the coolest things about American sports. I could see I would go anywhere for that sort of thing. I would love that to be a thing over in Northern Ireland a little bit more, but no, I can see why. Is there not a tailgating experience over in Wrigley?
No, like it's always been about the neighborhood, and Cub fans who are listening to this know, and even that has changed like dynamically since I've been a fan, because the Ricketts bought up like all the property around the field, and it feels like it's higher end restaurants where like when I was, oh God, I'm gonna sound like an old man, when I was younger and I would go to Cub games, like the old Wrigleyville was filled with like mom and pop or like non franchise bars and places, and before the games it used to be like 25% off food, so like you would go early and go down and like get a pizza from like Red Ivy, which was one of the places, or like I used to go to Goose Island. There's a Goose Island brewery that was there, and they had a beer there that I adored called Cubbie Blue, and it was like a blueberry wheat beer, and like I don't know why, like I don't know if the beer was as good as much as like the knowing that I was going to a Cub game after, like in the feeling and nostalgia. So like going down in the neighborhood and getting like affordable food before you went to the game and like seeing the atmosphere, that was like the tailgating experience. But now it's like everything around there is so corporate. It doesn't feel like that. Like it's not like this fun experience. Like Gallagher Way is really cool in concept, and I like a lot about it, but like the accessibility and like the mon pop, like in the middle of a neighborhood feel has been lost a little bit, because like a lot of those businesses that like I think Cub fans went to for years were bulldozed to like build luxury high rises and apartments and stuff that the Ricketts as well own, which I think adds to the frustration of all this revenue that's coming from around the neighborhood and it not being translated into the spend on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I will know from my social media, having done some stuff with you before, it does feature a few sort of Cubs things popping up every now and then. The more we chat, the more I actually get popping up, to the point that one point I got no Brewers things for a while. But on top of that, I recently wrote a piece over at Brewer Fanatic, and I was having a look at sort of what owners have to spend, because it's a real interesting topic. Every owner in the league will pretty much get lambasted unless they're spending their own money out of their own pocket and making a loss, or unless you're the Dodgers. And I had a look at some of the loopholes of the system. So one of them is the Dodgers, when they were near bankruptcy in 2012, were given a very favorable deal where what they give to revenue sharing is like capped at a certain amount each year. So it started at 84 million. They revised that to 130 million after a couple of years because they realized that figure was way low. And then they raised it by 4% a year. The problem was the Dodgers TV deal that they recently signed was worth 350 million, well, between 280 to 350 million dollars a year. So they basically were getting significant sums of money that they weren't having to share like everybody else did with their local TV. The other one, and this might not be so pretty to some Cubs fans, is that the Ricketts also benefit from a bit of a loophole, because you only share money that you get directly from a TV company. So Marquee Sports Network, whatever they're paying you in local advertising, goes to revenue sharing. If you own part of Marquee Sports, that doesn't get included. And the Chicago Cubs technically own a share of marquee sports, and that's how they get some revenue. So they actually share less with the rest of the league than they should do, which means there should be more for the Cubs to actually spend on their on-field product, on their farm system, on developing players, their coaching setup, their scouting setup. There should be more money there than there is, which somehow makes the picture even worse when you see how much is actually brought in each year. Sorry to go on a financial ramble there.
No, and I think like that's a huge talking point in Cub fandom, and I think it's a solid transition to what I think should be our first topic today, and just kind of like overall season thoughts about the Cubs and the Brewers. And yeah, I think if you look at these two teams offensively, the aggregate numbers say the Cubs are the third best offense in baseball for the year. If I know I had you on an episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy when we were talking about what makes the Brewers so good, and you had like a point after the middle of May in which like the Brewers kind of took off, and I was looking at just fan graphs, and I think this is actually still floating the Cubs pretty high. But like the end of May, the Brewers since the end of May to the rest of this year were the second best offense in baseball, and the Cubs slide down to 8. And like I think if we go even further in the future, if we look at from like July or after the All-Star break, that number is going to be even worse for the Cubs because they were just a completely different offensive team after the All-Star break. After there was a lot of things going on. There was the Kyle Tucker injury that was, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, and here I have Milwaukee still second in the final 66 games in Toronto, and the Cubs slide to 13th. So this is a team, like on my perspective, and I'm going to give my perspective of the Brewers, and you can give your perspective of the Cubs. Like the Brewers were probably the most well-rounded regular season team, which reflected in their record by having one of the best records in baseball this year. However, this was also a weird major league season, in my opinion, that I feel like there was a lot of teams that were like sort of trying, and there was no elite team, where the Brewers had like an elite playability in the regular season that really hit a lot of the weaknesses of the teams that they regularly played. And they won a lot of close games because they have extremely good defense. They're a high contact, low strikeout, high walk team. And they had some really great emerging performances from Mizorowski. They had a really nice year from Peralta. And, beyond that, it was impressive to me how they put together most games. I know Chad Patrick went in between the rotation and the bullpen, and he was effective, kind of in different ways on both sides. Health was definitely an issue. When Woodruff came back, he was super, super good. And then he unfortunately got hurt, which, I think that Cubs series is probably a sweep if Woodruff is healthy. But then we can talk about the weird decision of starting Matt Boyd in short rest in game 1 in Milwaukee and whether or not that should happen. But, effectively on the outside, I think the Brewers went into this playoffs like with, the same types of weaknesses that the Brewers have had, a lack of like true elite slugging, and that reared its head versus the Dodgers because the Dodgers, like ironically, got healthy and their frontline pitching was extremely dominant. And when you're facing the Dodgers, you better hit home runs when you get your pitches, not just singles, because you're not going to get many hits when you're facing, Yamamoto, Snell, and then Shohei Ohtani, who did some really just incredible things in that NLCS that are hard to manage. But like overall, I think if I'm a Brewers fan, like that was a really, really good season, but I can feel similar to when I was in 2015 with the Cubs, this itch of, all right, cool. Like we've won this division. We can win this division with what we have. How do we get to that, over that hump of like seeing more success in the playoffs?
Yeah. The Brewers were a fun team to watch this year. As you said, they got some under the radar performances. Chad Patrick was one of them. The acquisition of Quinn Priester was brilliant early. Caleb Durbin. And they seem to find a way of getting the best out of the players. They love guys who grind. And part of that might be part of the issue with the playoff struggles, where it's tough to grind for 162 games a season and be right there mentally all year. And And, even I know there's a lot of talk about like homers as you come to the playoffs. It did seem like there was a bit of a lull after the Cubs series and going straight into that to the Dodgers, which is Brewers hadn't won a playoff series since 2018. I do feel there was a bit of emotional energy there. But even when they faced the Dodgers, they lost their approach altogether. They started swinging for the fences. They were swinging at the wrong pitches, both in and outside the strike zone. They just lost it. When you see Sal Frelick trying to consistently turn on balls and pull them over the fence, there's a bit of an issue every now and then, fine. But they just lost what made them so good the rest of the season, which was, I'm just going to trust the next guy up. But no, it was a brilliant season for them. Lots to build on. Lots of young players coming through, certainly in the rotation. And I have high hopes for the likes of Priester and Ragauskis. Really dealt with his demons that were, he was struggling the last couple of months. For him to turn it around like he did in the playoffs, when I thought he actually was maybe a bit weaker mentally than that, was brilliant. And then even looking like the other side of the fence, I'm probably higher on the Cubs than maybe a lot of Cubs fans are now. I thought that in the matchups you guys played against the Brewers this year, the Cubs actually were the better team and reflected that in the 7-6 record. There was the hot start, but when you were looking at teams that matched up well with the Brewers, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, the Brewers do traditionally make a lot of contact. The problem is with Dansby, PCA, and Nico, and I love Matt Shaw's defense at the hot court. Anytime the ball went near him, I just saw like a blur, and then the ball was being picked and just first base. So I just thought defensively they really negated the Brewers very well, and it was actually almost captured beautifully by, I think it was the penultimate game of the year when I think it was Contreras lined a 112-mile-an-hour rocket, and the only second baseman in the league from where he started that was catching that ball was Nico Horner, and he just snow-coned it. And I just thought it was always going to be nip and tuck, but the way that both teams sort of were diverging from each other, the Cubs were so good at elevating the ball, which did mean that when the wind was blowing in, there were some offensive struggles. But when Michael Busch was on.
Yeah, he is an extremely good batter when he's locked in.
Absolutely, but he struggled in August as well. You look at Kyle Tucker, obviously the injury really hampered him, but the way he started was just phenomenal. PCA came flying out of the gate, so I think we also expected maybe not as much as actually happened, but some regression because he was chasing so much and then somehow putting those, out of the ballpark. Like he was hitting things around his face out of the ballpark and then hitting ones around his ankles out of the ballpark.
The emergence of PCA at the beginning of the season was so fun for that reason, because it was like Vlad Guerrero type stuff. He was hitting balls at his eyes like 400 feet, and it was just like, Jesus, is this who this kid is? Like this is gonna be really fun. But like, it's interesting if you look at the numbers. Sorry to interject on the PCA thing. The one thing that's super interesting about PCA was that the chase rate didn't get worse as the year on. When he got bad, like the chase rate actually got slightly better towards the end of the year. He just, when he got a pitch in the zone early in the season, he didn't miss it. And the end of the year, he wasn't hitting those at all. So it was just like, it literally is like, well, the patience seems to be getting better and the pitch selection's still good. But early in the season, it was a beach ball. At the end of the year, it was a golf ball. And like, he just never recovered from that.
Totally. And the other thing I'll mention, and it's a strange comp and maybe it's completely off, but Cade Horton's emergence, I think, is really fascinating. And he reminded me a lot, not of like 2021 Corbin Burns, but like 23-24, where the strikeouts were there. The cutter wasn't getting the same whiffs that it did in 2021, but it seemed like he was just impossible to square up. Any contact was pretty much weak contact. And that's what you're sort of getting out of him, even in his year with not the Diamondbacks, with the Orioles. I imagine what we'll see with the Diamondbacks going forward. You're not going to see a 12% strikeout. 12% strikeout. Am I getting that right? 12%, 12 strikeouts per 9. That's the word I'm looking for. Jeepers.
We got there.
Yeah, you see it more like that 8-9 range, and then you just see poor quality of contact. And I thought Cade Horton, the way he deals with that cut ride fastball, which I think is hittable, but everything off, he just mixes his pitches beautifully. So I think there's some really exciting stuff for the Cubs. I think Nico Horner's exceptional, and Dansby Swanson is maybe hot and cold, but Matt Shaw, again, showed some signs of why he could be very good, and then maybe over-leaned into that sort of pull side approach and was too much at the cost of some contact. I think that can be quickly addressed in the offseason. But like, there's all the ingredients there to really take off. And I don't think a Kyle Tucker is needed for that to happen, to be quite honest with you.
Interesting. Okay. And that's a perfect transition to, off-season thoughts as, we get started and, the World Series is over. Dodgers are back-to-back champs. I feel like there's a really good chance based on how they address their roster. Like, we could be talking about the same thing. They could be our first three-peat since, the 98 to 2000 Yankees. And they went for 4 and were taken out by a really fun to watch Diamondbacks team in a really fun World Series, the first ever World Series that went to November. One of my favorite World Series of all time, besides 2016, that 2001 7-gamer with the walk-off by Luis Gonzalez on a jammed cutter from Mariano Rivera. Just so cool. But yeah, I think as a Cubs...
remember all of this, Jeff. I remember every bit.
You do? My big concern for the Cubs, and like maybe objectively, you talk Cub fans and myself off the ledge. Like the Cubs, their MLB Network uses the phrase aircraft carrier, like in a lineup, like a truly elite bat that like raises the tide. And like I feel like we definitely saw it this year with the 2, like I would say Jekyll Hyde performances of when Kyle Tucker was right, the entire lineup was really like gelling because he was doing what he needed to do in the middle of that lineup. And without contract value and whatever he's going to get, the length of the contract, and then we're throwing in this weird coming labor dispute at the end of next year in which you could be paying for a guy that you're not going to get a full season out of, which I feel like is going to make the Cubs weirdly conservative in the moves that they make this year. Even though that after this season, the Cubs literally have, I think it's like 13 players on their payroll. Like it's like, this is a weird cliff where there's a bunch of guys that are on expiring deals. And like, if they have to come out of that labor deal and like put together a competitive team, they're going to be in a really bad spot if that's how they're going to operate. But that being said, like, I do worry about this lineup without a guy like Kyle Tucker in the middle and how they replicate that performance. Like there's, Owen Casey, Kevin Alcantara, Moises Ballesteros, guys that can maybe fit in and rotate a little bit into the lineups and be used as DH or right field. But, I think like Cub fans learned their lesson. And the thing that I thought that I got a lot of pushback early in the year about, I didn't want the Cubs to start the season with Matt Shaw as their third baseman because I felt like the variance of a rookie performance is too much if you're a team that's truly trying to compete for a division. And here we were early in the season, Matt Shaw was hitting, like under the Mendoza line, and like defensively, he really came around, like, and was adding value that way. But like offensively, it was a black hole, but there was no need for it because like Carson Kelly started on this huge heater, Kyle Tucker, like Dansby Swanson was contributing, Ian Happ was hot in early in the year. The whole team was really hitting the ball well, but like, what gives you optimism that this Cubs lineup could survive without like a big bat in the middle?
So I think you're right about. I'll start off a little bit. And one of those things you said, I'll just pick it up. The rookie bats generally will take 2, maybe 3 months to really get going in a season because it's such a big leap from AAA upwards.
Yeah,
I actually think you have the rookie bats now. Big names are sexy. It's fun to say I have Kyle Tucker in the middle of the lineup. It's not as fun when you're looking at Kyle Tucker from July through September, or and you're like, oh yeah, it's a big name, but it's not doing it for me. And just because it's a big name doesn't always mean you're reliable. I think Ballesteros is a really interesting candidate, even if he's just a majority DH. I think the bat is really solid. His bat to ball is fantastic, and he can crank it probably 15 to 20 homers in a season. But he's a strong presence that sort of lengthens your lineup. Owen Casey's the type of profile that either is going to hit after 3 to 4 months in the season, but he's going to take some adjusting to do. But you saw him
strikeout rate is pretty tough. Like it's
but it was quite good. It got better in AAA
it got
this
way
year.
better. It did, yes, which is why he ended up getting a promotion at the one point, because it gotten way better, and the walk rate went up as well.
I think it was sub 20% over like a month or 2 month span at one point, which is, when you've got that type of pop, like that is impressive. So it'll take him time, and it needs a bit of trust. But if you can develop that sort of stuff, as you can see north of the Chicago border, you have something that you're under control for 6 years, which is fantastic. Now, I'm not saying there's a bat wouldn't add to that lineup, but I think the only place that's really clear to do, so I'm not sure Carson Kelly's going to repeat maybe his season. You could look at a third baseman, but you could also say, hang on, Matt Shaw showed signs that he was just maybe pressing a little too hard, but it's there. It's there, and it's just that little bit of experience as to knowing what pitches you can identify. It's something Christian Yelich actually was famous for saying, and has spoken a lot about in interviews, is that as you develop in a league, it takes you a while to work out which pitches you can turn on and which ones you can't, and not to try and force it and just hit what you're given. So, look, I don't think the lineup is actually all that concerning to me from a Cubs standpoint. I think your lineup is going to be just fine. I'm not saying it's going to be best in the league, but I think there's the potential that it takes off and can be a really deep lineup, which is sometimes more effective than just having like a top-heavy, 1 through 5 and then a big drop-off. If you can have 1 through 8, all capable of clearing the fence, that's a terrifying lineup. So, yeah, I wouldn't be as concerned. I would certainly say that maybe the Cubs offense on paper should be better than the Brewers next year.
Yeah, and I think, that's a good point for transition. It's just like my evaluation of what the Brewers need to do. And, I think it's weird. We were talking about this offline. I think this is like a good topic to bring online. The Cubs and the Brewers are going to behave oddly similar this offseason. There's going to be very little noise for either team. The Brewers are, we talked about this earlier this year, are like historically quiet. Like nothing gets out. There's not, when they're making deals and stuff like that, there's not an inkling that's going to happen. There's not even like a rumor that comes out after, and like it could be because of media coverage that they don't get that they should get, or it could just be because they're an insanely tight-lipped front office, which like either or, like there's just not, like, you're not reading rumors about the Brewers ever. Like that's like, and things happen. They do things that are pretty monumental. And like when they got William Contreras in that deal that sent Sean Murphy to the Braves, like that was like such a nothing. And I'm like, that was a huge acquisition. Like that is like, he's a perennial all-star catcher with a great bat, great framing, good arm behind the plate, like the better of the two Contreras brothers. And they got him for nothing. For absolutely nothing.
But Ruiz, and we got Joel Payam's back as well. So
oh yeah, that's right. So yeah, I think like it is odd to me, and I go back and forth on whether or not this is like selfishness or irresponsibility of this ownership group. Of why have the Cubs removed themselves from the top tier of the free agent market? Like I think there are plenty of examples where like they're like those contracts, some of these players that make the free agent market, they don't work out. Like there's plenty of examples of that, and like the back end. But when the Cubs are like have the ability to absorb a mistake, a financial mistake, because of their ability to generate an intense amount of revenue, it is odd that we are behaving just like you guys. And like it's also in a weird way like flattering, of like acknowledging that you guys are doing something better than we are, but we could absolutely negate the conversation of this being a rivalry if we flexed our financial might. Do you feel that's odd, or do you think that's like just too much hubris from a Cub fan perspective?
A little much. I would say that baseball is the best thing about baseball is that it is completely and utterly unpredictable. For all the talk of like the Dodgers, it was inevitable. They just about pulled the last 2 games out of their backsides, and with some, I almost think if Game 6 hadn't ended the way it did with a base running mistake, then actually the aggressive base running the Blue Jays have had all year would have contributed enough for them to win that in 9 innings. So you're talking really small margins, and you'll see that across the board. So I think the Brewers are very good at developing in-house. They spend a lot of money upgrading their farm system to the point that whether it's in the Dominican, whether it's even low A, they've just made a whole new stadium and moved from Carolina to Wilson. Short move, but entire new facilities. Everything is top of the range. So they know the pathway they need to do because the free agent market is tough to compete in. And the farm system is right up there. So I wouldn't say it would negate the rivalry because I think that'll always be there with two states that have rivalries, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball at this point.
Yeah.
One thing I
You
would
could
say
argue that the football rivalry is like the opposite. Like you have to beat your rival for it to be a rivalry. Like the Packers have owned the Bears like my entire existence. So like it's not. I don't think there's any Bear fan that's gonna be like, oh yeah, that's our big rival. It's like no, if they kick our ass, and it's super depressing.
Fair. Well, yeah, but do I believe the Cubs could spend more? Yes. I think this offseason is going to be interesting because Kyle Tucker's the standout name. Bo Bichette is good, but he's not really a fit for the Cubs. If I'm looking at it, I don't really want him playing second base over Nico. Yes, the bat's good, but the guy can't. His range is really. I don't even think he's a fit for second base or third base because the arm strength isn't great. So I don't think he's a fit.
The only place he fits for the Cubs is third base, and like exactly what you said, the arm strength is a problem. Like it's not. That's in Matt Shaw. That was supposed to be the thing. It's like you want to displace a guy that's like shown elite level defense to put a guy like. And I don't buy the Cubs are going to be in on Bregman. Like I still think that like based on his age and the AAV, I don't see it as a solid fit. Like I think like.
I don't mind that fit, actually. That would have been the one.
Well, I think they should have got him last year. And when they balked on like the type of deal he wanted last year, I was more frustrated. Now I feel like we're a year later. We've gotten one less year of him like in his prime, but we're going to pay a premium of him having a solid season. And now we know what like Matt Shaw is. Where last year, if Matt Shaw forced the issue onto the lineup and you had Bregman that extends that lineup, and then you have Matt Shaw insurance. Like I think they fumbled the football, and they should have gotten Bregman last year, but wouldn't match the AAV of the Red Sox. They were like under it by like 15 mil, and apparently the whole reason it took so long to get him wrapped up was that he kept waiting for the Cubs to counter, and they didn't. And like that's because ownership said they wouldn't pay that money, and like that. Yeah. So like those are that's a very specific moment of like where I'm like I think it's justified to be pissed as a Cubs fan when you trade away $20 million of Cody Bellinger's contract and then literally just pocket that money. And like we were under the CBT by a significant margin this year, which like I think we were 17th in payroll. Like I think if you make the revenue the Cubs are at, like you really need to have a really young core that's coming up, and that's why your payroll is that low, or like you need to spend better. Like that's I think like the Cubs have taken themselves out of things like Shohei Ohtani and Bryce Harper over the years because of this fear of a long contract. And like that Bryce Harper contract looks pretty damn good at this point. Like getting Bryce Harper for $25 million a year when he won an MVP or a challenge for an MVP and brought the Phillies. Like, and yeah, it's interesting. Like I think one guy I do want the Cubs to entertain, and I think it's an extremely challenging deal, and it does limit their roster flexibility. But I think a Kyle Schwarber reunion would be really fun. I like the idea, but I don't like the idea of having a full-time DH. I like using the DH spot to spell guys from time to time. I think we saw like at the end of the year when Kyle Tucker was hurt, having Seiya Suzuki off the DH revitalized his bat. Like, and he's like just a weird guy. Sometimes like it's the focus on something else that like gets him locked in at the plate. Where like when he was a DH, he really struggled at times because like he gets in his head and he needs resets. So like I like using the DH in the NL game or just in general of like not like unless the guy's an absolute elite monster like offensively.
Well, it's Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, like near the MVP talk, but like yeah, he's 33, so he's not. I'm not sure what that contract looks like. Is he David Ortiz and he's hitting like that till he's 37, or like are we going to see diminished bat speed and all the things that come with getting older that I'm experiencing, like, is that just going to rear its head a lot sooner?
You are comparable to Kyle Schwarber, to be fair, Jeff.
Yeah.
I mean, I get what you mean about Schwarber. He would be an interesting fit that would raise the prospect of maybe Ballesteros, so that it wouldn't trust him behind the plate, of possibly being moved on to get the pitching depth. And I think that's where the Cubs could separate themselves this year. I still think Palencia was good last year. I still think you're missing a closer. Like, you want a solid 8 and 9, and that gets overlooked. People are like, oh, he's got a great 9th inning guy. Yeah, no, you want to be able to shut that game down after the 7th and maybe after the 6th inning, where like the Brewers for 3 years had Devin Williams followed by Josh Hader. That was, we reached 7 in the lead. That's game over. Good night. Adios, muchachos.
Like, both those guys could, in certain situations, both could get you 2 innings. Like, it was over. It was just done. Like, that was.
Josh Hader wouldn't, actually, because he was free. He said he wasn't getting rewarded in arbitration, so he took a. But no, 100%. And I think Devin Williams might actually be a fit for the Cubs this offseason. And not super proud. I mean, I know he had a good finish to the year for the Yankees, actually, once he got his head around New York and that media. So I think he's a good fit. I think the one as well, you talked about missing out on Harper. I think the Cubs balked and should have been all over Corbin Burns. I know he got injured this year, but that's the type of pitcher that should have been all over. He has actually a real history of durability. Every pitcher is going to get a Tommy John at some point, but that's not super worrying. But even with the stuff down, the guy was still performing. So that wasn't even so much of a worry. I just thought that was the best fit on the open market, and I couldn't believe they didn't jump all over him.
I agree. I think the Cubs have really been very cautious about how they approach pitching, which, like, because they don't love the cost, but like what they need is to spend money or trade for a guy that has high strikeout type ability. And I know there's been some discussion out there about Tariq Skubal being available, and I'm curious about like his longevity. I know he's had some health issues in the past, but he's been an extremely dominant pitcher. Like, that's the guy that I'm like, if they want Casey Alcantara Ballesteros, then like I say yes, like, and put him at the front of that rotation. And
I think you need a top 10. I think you need probably a top 10 prospect. Or
that's true.
Or like, not that the volume of that is invaluable, but I think it can't be players where like, oh well, we're not including them because we have better players on our roster. Mm-hmm. However you want to look at that, it would have to be no, you're getting something big.
I'd give up Matt Shaw. I would, like, and and because Tariq Skubal is, I think, like long-term value for this rotation much higher at the moment than Matt Shaw. And it's not that like you can go in the free agent market and replace Matt Shaw if you're gonna trade those guys and use your money to get Bregman and then like draft a third baseman again. But then it's interesting to think like
the extension.
Kyle Tucker walks and like a third baseman of the future, Cam Smith, like you got rid of him for 1 year, Kyle Tucker. So like, how many times are the Cubs going to do this 1 year thing and not extend the guy that comes over here? Like, that's supposed to be the whole point of doing this, is like to get the early negotiating. And but it is interesting, like on a Cubs fan perspective, like in mid-June, every Cubs fan's like, extend Kyle Tucker right now. And then by September, people are like, I never want him to wear the Cub uniform again. And it's just like such an extreme of like, hold on. Look at like the guy's been hurt, and under the hood, like this is still an elite bat. Like this is a guy you'd be happy. But yeah, like at 400 million, 10 years, like I'm also balking on the logic around a deal like that, because that's in like weirdly in the Shohei Ohtani territory of contract value. And like, he's not Shohei Ohtani. Like no one is like that's like, he's one of one. Like that's, so I get I think it's tough because I can rationalize like Jed Hoyer and be like, I know that like there should be logical spending, but I think there are moments like the Cubs need to understand that they can spend irrationally because they should be able to absorb that mistake better than another franchise because of the money they make. And they seem not interested in doing that. And like that's a weird frustration. And like, it's a selfish frustration. It's like, you sold us that you're going to be the Dodgers, but you make nearly Dodgers and Yankees money, but you spend like the Reds. Like that's a weird like place to sit.
And as you said, it's like the dead certs, that you expect to be on. It's your Corbin Burns as a pitcher, it's your Tariq Skubals as a pitcher. It's those types of guys that you're like, okay, I'm not sitting here thinking, are you going to perform? Are you not? It's like, I know if you're healthy, you're a dog.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the level of spending where you'd say, like, the other thing with Tucker is he missed a lot of 2024 with injury as well.
Correct.
Yeah,
A weird foot
defense
injury.
took a slump.
Yeah.
Defense took a slump this year too. So maybe that was injury related too. But
he was not as advertised defensively. Like we were told, like Gold Glover, and I'm like, this guy gets bad breaks on the ball. Like he looks kind of lost out there at times. Like I was shocked how poor I thought his defense was.
Yeah. So Cody Bellinger?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm a big Cody Bellinger guy in general. I like what he brings to the table. I like his approach. I like his defensive versatility. I'm all for a reunion if that's what they feel like works for the team. I think he would be an incredible right fielder. Then you have an outfield of Belly, PCA, and Ian Happ, and then like in that model too, you retain like some of your outfielders that you could possibly flip in a deal for an arm or something. But like I was sad when the Cubs got rid of Bellinger because I like that. I like watching that guy swing a baseball bat. I think he has just an absolutely beautiful left-handed swing. I think when he's healthy, he is one of the better players in the game when he's locked in. And like, like I know there's like all this under the hood things, but like he'll give up power to like drive in runs. And I think if you add that to like why he was so good for this, like when he was healthy for the Cubs, is because they don't have a lot of guys with that approach. And there would be guys in front of him would get on and he would hit it the other way. And like his at bats were like must watch TV when he was locked in, like on the 2024 team. And yeah, I would absolutely adore having Cody Bellinger come back. Like I think the world. He's one of my favorite non-Cub players to follow in this game.
Oh yeah, no, he's a good fit. It was a weird contract for a team that doesn't really have those sort of cash problems, and I can see the Brewers doing that and saying we just can't afford this contract. But it was weird to say, "Oh, we'll just give him away," basically, because like it wasn't for anyone in return. It was just I'm going to salary dump, which when you're getting Tucker back, it felt like an upgrade, absolutely. But there was always that thought that Bellinger can at least be in the realms of a Cal Tucker.
The Cubs traded and got Cody Petit for him, and he was cut in spring training. Like it's like it was salary dump, and then they didn't spend that money on Bregman, and like that, a huge what if for me of like, all right, cool, like like what does this offense look like instead of Matt Shaw? You got Matt Bregman or Alex Bregman at like the 2 or the 4.
Cam Smith.
Yeah, exactly, and like that. Cam Smith doesn't crack this roster in 2025 if he were on the Cubs. Like he made the Houston Astros out of desperation. They literally had no one to play in the outfield. Like that's I have a buddy who does Astros podcast, and I've been on his, and he's been on my like podcast in the past, and he told me he's like, this is not a normal situation. This is more like they literally don't have anyone else like to play outfield. Like it was just like, all right, like that's bizarre. Like you traded Kyle Tucker knowing you have no one to play outfield. Like that's but yeah, I think that's a good place to leave episode 1 of 94 Problems. Where can people find your writing? I know you've mentioned Brewer Fanatic, but give a plug to where people can find you on social media and your writing.
Yeah, so I write over at Brewer Fanatic. It's a big old amalgamation of some really cool writers. We have some of the best minor league coverage you'll look for. Amazing team doing that. We have some of the best writers you'll see. Like it's a great place. If you follow the Brewers, come visit. You will not be disappointed. I'm at the Brewers blogs over on X, and I don't know if I'm Jake McKibbin or the Brewers blogs on Blue Sky as well, but feel free to pop on over and have a look at my stuff.
Awesome. Well, this has been the first ever episode of 94 Problems, a Cubs-Brewers perspective podcast. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you are hitting that subscribe button, as we are going to be populated on the Bleacher Bunch network run by the great Danny Rocket. So this will be one of the only Brewer adjacent contents on a Cub channel. So check us out, follow us on social media, and until next time, we'll see you guys later. And go Cubs. And from Jake, I'm assuming,
Go Brew Crew! Yeah!
All right, see you guys.